one of the games my brother liked to play with the mushrooms was, in this dialogue situation, he was always saying, tell me something I can't possibly know, right? And that will validate that it's not me, that this is coming from. I don't know that he ever succeeded in getting it. It's very cagey, they're very tricky that way. It's, but occasionally they do seem to tell people things that they can't possibly know, or that they've never thought about in quite that way. Now it's come out, for example, that Crick's insight into the structure of DNA was assisted by LSD, and he reluctantly but finally admitted that was a big influence. And many computer scientists, Steve Jobs has said LSD's been very useful for his creativity. Kary Mullis, the Nobel Prize winner who figured out the PCR chain reaction, has been quite upfront about it. LSD gave him the ability to get down with the molecules and see what's happening. In some sense, there is a communication. In some sense, the question isn't even valid, because where do the boundaries between the self and the world exist? We're not really separate. I mean, we're part of this information field. And, this notion that consciousness, I do think that consciousness it's like a property of the continuum. It's like the old physicist concept of the ether or something. It kind of permeates everything, and it's not really localized in the human brain or necessarily even generated by the human brain.
Why does the brain require DMT for normal function if this is indeed true? Yeah, and it's hard to say. I think that perhaps one of the functions of ordinary levels of DMT is kind of like a, kind of reality thermostat. If you have a certain kind of narrow window of levels of DMT in the brain, it maintains this ordinary level of, perceptual, consensus reality that most of us live in. Kind of like the endo matrix in a way, as opposed to like an externally applied, psychological or, consciousness kind of matrix like in the movie. This is one that's internally generated.
But it may be that the brain is a place where it becomes focused and concentrated. The brain may be as much a receiver of the signal as it is a generator of the signal. Nobody can really say, but that model in some ways appeals more to me than the notion that it's all coming from the brain. The brain is more like a node, and there's this sort of field of consciousness that permeates everything, and to a certain degree everything is conscious.
I think of the shaman as entering into this net of being in the higher worlds, in the heaven worlds, and that's why I've personified the net of being, this painting behind us, as this continuum of heads interlocking infinitely in all directions, because that points to being as a continuum, as a network, in a sense, to an infinite realm. And this is a part of the deep fabric of our being, I think, because we sense ourselves as souls related to many.
There is this everyday world, but you can be in a place where there is no you and still perceive the world. That scared me. Losing my ego was the scariest thing I ever, and I still don't like it.
A profound state which may be reached by use of these entheogens, psychedelics, hallucinogens, whatever you're going to call them, which is known as ego loss or ego death. Unfortunately, subsequent to the coinage of this term, ego has come to be used in a completely other sense. It has been used in the sense of pride, and that is not what ego death is about.
I mean, ego death would mean you lose your sense of I for good, and that's not what happens. They mean a temporary suspension of the ego when ego death is spoken of.
Ego death means the death of you as a concept, whereas we walk around thinking of ourselves as things. We think of, I am sitting in the chair, therefore, I am a thing, the chair is a thing. When we reach the realm of ego death, or ego dissolution, or whatever you're going to call it, there is no longer any perceived boundary between oneself and the chair. In this state, there are no things. There is just one continuous experience.
In some sense, all of experience is an illusion. Everything that we experience in the here and now and our state of being is a hallucination, an elaborate hallucination that our brains construct. We happen to call it consensus reality, but it's still, physics tells us that, the picture of reality that we build so that we can navigate through the world and not step in front of buses and stuff like that and do all those, the world doesn't really look like this at all. The brain constructs a model of reality that more or less maps onto reality. It's good enough that we can survive.
But we're focused in a kind of, constricted dimensional awareness of reality. And, for safety reasons mostly, and we don't necessarily want to know that we are actual one consciousness with all beings and things at all times. So, nevertheless, those dimensions are all open to our being. We have a complete freedom of the continuum of being.
If we change the nature, we have the model and we have the real world out here and we have the sensory neural interface that's taking this information in, interpreting it, and giving us the model. If we change the nature of the sensory neural interface a little or a lot, if we substitute, say, DMT for serotonin, the model of the world that we get changes radically. And who's to say that that's any less valid than the model that, the brain constructs for, for everyday purposes? So this idea that, it's all illusion, it's all hallucination. That's what experience is, That's why, in some ways, I sometimes get a little impatient with people that say, well, a drug experience cannot possibly have any spiritual validity. Well, I'm here to tell you that all experience is a drug experience. We're all on drugs all the time, largely because we're made of drugs, and that's what drives us. Experience is sort of the what issues out of this biochemical process of, all these neurotransmitters and hormones moving around our brain. It's drugs.